Alright, welcome back to the KayKay Chess channel. Today I have 15 endgames that you must know as a chess player. First is a very basic endgame between a king, pawn, and like a king position. It is white to play, and basically, let's suppose you play king a5 or king c5. Does that matter? Is there a way to win this position? Take some time to think about it, and once you're done, yeah, I'll tell you the answer. Okay, so Uh, in this position, there is no way to force a win. Let's suppose you play king e5, then black will play king c5, king e7, king d7, and the problem here is black's king will not let you in, and therefore, since you don't have the opposition, you don't have a way in. There is simply no way to force a win here. However, if you take the same circumstance and change it up a little bit, it is white to play here, and do you think the situation changes any bit just because of the rank at which the pawn is located? Take some time to think about it. Okay, so hopefully you got some time. But on king c6, king c8, here you can play b6, king b8, and play b7, which forces the king to come out and like give you the square on c7, and therefore leading to a promotion. This is an easy win, and therefore, uh, just a puzzle that we have finished. Now, I wanted to shift gears to a endgame position here. Take some time to think about it. Is who's winning? How? What is the best move? And it is black to play. Black has pawns, three pawns, one extra pawn. Uh, White's king is in the center active. Black's king is in the center active. This rook is attacking a dead pawn, but is defending b3. This rook is also really, really active, hitting the pawn on b3. What can black do? Okay, so for those of you that said play anywhere on the third rank, that is correct, but you can't really play here, here, or here, or here. So the only square left is on a3, right? You can't even play on these two squares either. So rook a3 is the only correct move here. And the reasoning is you force white to make a decision. This rook can't move, this pawn can't move, this pawn can't move. So if this king moves, let's suppose onto f4. Now you can play king f6, right? And let's say like something like this, you just go back. And the idea is you are going to put your king on g7 and then play f6, forcing the rook away, and then you take the pawn. And once you take that pawn, you can play check and you can take the other pawn as well. And you will have a bunch of pass pawns, right? But let's suppose your king goes the other way, right? Because they realize you want to kick out the rook, so they're going to defend this pawn here with their king. And so then you play f5 check, and that forces the king, right? Because the king is trying to defend, to come and defend the rook, come and defend the pawn. However, this rook is now stuck, and you can permanently fix it by playing f6. And now white is completely stuck. White has completely trapped all of white's pieces, and none of them can move. You would have to sack a pawn, and then you would have to sack the rook, because now you're threatening checkmate, right? So you have to sack the rook, but this is just completely winning. Um, However, let's suppose um, black makes a mistake by playing the move rook f5, right? Then, uh, can white save the game, right? And the surprising answer to that is yes, white can, simply by playing the move king e4. And on king e4 takes, on f6, just takes, and playing king f4. It is very important to note that you don't play king f4 here, otherwise king f7 is devastating. It's devastating because after takes, black is the one that gets into your position, and because they get into your position, you will lose. You will lose your pawn, and I will get more into this precisely from the next example. Um, Here it is white to play. White has two pawns, right? This pawn island exists. Black has two pawns. It is white to play. Can white somehow squeeze out a win, or is this a draw, or is basically black's active king on the fifth rank going to lead to black winning, right? All right, so hopefully you had some time to think about it if you haven't paused. Um, this position's quite tricky because even though black's king is a little bit more active, it's kind of like a false illusion because after king e4, this king has to stay glued to this pawn. And not only that, like if you try to take this pawn, you will run into some problems because let's say you go all the way here and you take, right? Then you lose this pawn and you lose the race to the pawn island, and basically that means white win. However, let's say you play king to g4, right? And on king e5, you are a little bit more conservative. You play king to g5, right? You're like, I will not give away my pawn. But then prompt comes in at the fact that the king can now ignore your pawn, and just like literally like psych you and then come back. And the idea is again, if you go here, they'll play king to f5, and on takes they'll take your pawn, another one. And if you're like, okay, I'm really, really scared, well, it really, really doesn't matter because on after king e5, they will squeeze out whatever life is left of this king, anyways, and then take the pawn, anyways. And yeah, that's the second endgame. The third one, or actually, no, that should be the fifth one, um, is this endgame here. This one's also quite tricky. Take some time to pause. It is black to move, um, and they have basically a double island, whereas white has two separate pawns that are isolated but strong and alone. And then in the center, a king to defend black's king from infiltrating. And you know, what is the best move for black? Take some time to think about it. Um, the answer to this particular puzzle is the move b4. And on b4, the idea is on takes. You want to end up in a situation which is equal, simple, but because your pawn structure is so bad, white can try a little bit more of a trick to play something like c4, right? And the trick here comes in at trying to make you go back, trying to make you go back so that you lose your pawn. And if you lose your pawn, then white is up a pawn. Not only is white up a pawn, they'll push all the way up into position. Um, and that very particular position is losing, and I will discuss that one in a little bit more detail. But c4 is meant to be a little bit more tricky. And if you saw the next move, that's even more crazy, is the move b3 in your calculations. And basically, the idea of this move is white can take. But after taking, and let's say going here, you break open the position, and after takes, it's a forced draw because the king and the pawn here can't make progress against this king. Though this king will just block out the king and the pawn together, both at the same time. And on this position after b3, you can play a3, right? White can try to be a little bit more like cautious, but at this point, once you go back, right, um, this is just a draw because white can't make any progress, and and this is where kind of the secret sauce behind b4 and then sacrifice comes in from, and it is because of the fact that you forced white into playing c4. And to kind of explain that a little bit more, this is the next position. It's the exact same position except it's a white to move, and let me explain. And this will hopefully explain why. Because black played b4 and ended a draw, right? White realizes they have to stop b4, so they played a3, right? They stop black. Then they walk up the king and they take the pawn, and then on a4, they get to infiltrate, right? Here, white cannot make any progress into black's position. However, they can try playing c4 c4. And the idea of c4 is to force black to make a choice. Let's suppose on king a5, you'll play king b7, and then you'll win the pawn. This pawn will promote, right? You force them out of their position. And on king a7, you can play king c7, king a6, king b8 using the 8th rank, and then forcing them out of the position anyways, right? Despite what they choose to do. And this is the power of like a tempo. And in the other position, if you realize this pawn was on c4, and not on c3. And because this pawn was on c3, right, you can play c4 here to basically waste a move so that you can then maneuver, you can force your opponent into a bad situation. Um, and this will take us to our next example. This is not really a puzzle. This is more of something I want you to see. This was between two people that are extremely drunk, because chess players like to drink. Stop judging. I know you're judging. Stop judging. They drink juice. Yeah, okay. All the adult audience probably understood what drinking means. Queen takes b4, a takes b4, a takes b3, king b2, king c4 was the way the game played out. And then, you're trying to do a little bit of a trick. King a3 tries to hold onto this pawn, and then on like king c3, this is actually a stalemate. And that seems to come out of nowhere. So uh, you sack the pawn, black sacks the pawn, but then white's like, I don't actually want to take the pawn, I want to make this a little bit spicy. Then black's like, I insist, please take my pawn that has now turned into a queen. And then white's like, yeah, I like taking queens. I'll take queen. Um, oh, that sounds misogynistic. I don't know why. And then king b, okay, and very important here is to play king c1, right? King c1 or any sort of like I guess move that stalls. Because after king takes b4, you play king b2, and after king b2, it is important to play king b2. If you play king c2, you'll lose. King b2, you take the opposition, and you take the opposition, you force the king. You force the king to not make any progress. This king blocks this king out. And takes that to our next game. This is also very interesting. We have white king, we have a black king, two pawns, and then pawns here. Excuse me. Take some time to think about this. What would you do? What would you do in this position? Um, and it's white to move. You think white can win? What do you do? Okay, so hopefully you had some time to think about it, but uh, like let's suppose because it's white to move, let's suppose you play king d6. King d6 doesn't quite work because of king b6, and the problem is no matter what you try to do, black will shut you down. Black king will mirror whatever your white king does, right? Um, and you're like, okay, if king d6 doesn't work, king e6 works, but like that again, not quite because the king will just follow you anywhere that you go, right? Um, and again, like trying to come closer doesn't really work. Okay, so if coming closer doesn't really work, and if he mirrors you in all these lines, let's think a little bit more creative, right? Because you play king d6 and because you play king e6, black can play king b6 and king b6. But if you play king to f5, on king to f5, there is no like the king can't just walk off the edge of the board, right? So what what do you do, right? On king f5, let's say king b6 is played, you can walk on to king f6 and then forcing a decision onto black. And let's say they keep on staying on the B rank, then you can actually okay. Basically, what's happening is you are making progress, right? You're trying to come behind into the position, into your opponent's position, similarly to what we've already seen in other situations. But on king f6, king b7, and king f7, now let's say you play king b8. Now you're too far away to defend this pawn because on king e7, let's say you play king b6, you will lose the opposition. However, on king c8, king d6, king b7, um, uh, you will first of all lose this pawn. But not only that, if you play king b7, there's king d7, and that opposition is so powerful that you will go all the way into their position. And because you're all the way into their position, you get to take both their pawns. Very important to be able to realize that you can take control of the opposition by by using by using a flank. It is very important to be able to see that. I'll move on to the next example. This is kind of a review of what we saw 2 games ago. Hopefully you can recognize this one. Try to solve it. Okay, hopefully you have tried it at least. Let's suppose black moves on to c7. You can play king a6, king c6, a4, king c5, and you go around. Um, and on king c7, right, instead of c5, if you play king c7, then on king a7, you use the eighth rank to force your opponent out of their position. Very important. Um, okay, now this is going to be a very important, very interesting discussion. This is black to move, and because it is black to move, this is lost. And what I mean by that is wherever black moves, let's say black moves down to d7, then you can push that corresponding pawn on the side. Now you're threatening the c6 pawn, and they're not going to lose a pawn for free, so you have to take. And because you have taken, you have traded, you lose the opposition. And because you lose the opposition, you lose the like fight for the squares here. And now this pawn will just walk down the board, and you will lose, right? Uh, this is probably not the most efficient way, but once the queen gets on the board, this is just winning. Um, Now a very similar situation to that one is oh right okay, so this example was the one I was talking about. Here you can't do the same trick of trying to push your pawn, like doing this here doesn't work. um and particularly that's because the king will just go into the corner and can't push a corner pawn. That is also important to note. um Going back to this position. This kind of just a kind of gag. On rook f4 is a terrible move because of king g5. King g5 forces the rook to make a decision here, so you have to take. King takes, and now there's opposition. Black wins this position. Um, on this is the 11th move position. Think about this. Is it possible to win this? If so, how? It is black to move. On king e5, there is king c4, king e4, and even if black somehow wins, the opposition is held by white, so this is a draw. Um, um, that is a interesting position. I will not show you that one yet. Um, First, look at this one. Here, white has an extra pawn. They can't directly push this because of the fact that the king will catch up, and that the draw. However, there is king to d2, king c1, king c2. Which one would you play? And there is a difference between them. Can you figure out what that is? If you play king d2 doesn't work at all because you will immediately run into a basically opposition problem. You can try to like cheese it or whatnot. You will not be able to hold opposition once you go to d2. But what you can do is by playing king c2, you can avoid the opposition issue, right? You can completely avoid the opposition issue by going around your pawn. And because you go around your pawn, you actually get to hold the opposition, and you will push your pawn. And if the black king is kind of like if black is too worried about the opposition and they try to keep it, then on king a6, they will lose the fight for the opposition anyways, or they will lose the fight for for the entirety of the B rank. Either way, white can force a win in this very specific situation without having the opposition. Because they can go around their pawn. Now I wanted to give you the hardest problem. This is white to move. White has pawn, king. Black has a pawn and king. Black can be quite tricky in some of these lines. Um, look through as many as you can. Determine who wins or if who loses or if it's a draw. And how it is again white to move. Um, give yourself some time. Okay. Hopefully you paused. This is winning white after the move king f2, but you have to be very careful. Um, First of all, like black cannot come closer because they will lose the opposition immediately and they'll just lose the game, right? And because of that reason, black will play something like h4, and you might be like, what does h4 do? Okay, let's suppose you play king to f3, right? On king f3, there is h3, and you can't take this because then the king will just run over to the corner, and this is a draw. However, if you play something, okay, if you play h4, king f3, h3, then and like g3, then on here, um, or actually not even that. The king can just walk up. This king can just walk up, um, and because of that fact, you will end in a draw. Um, and let's see. So that's why you have to play king g1, because if king f3 doesn't work, then you will attack through the h3 square. And on h3 you play g3. Very important that you don't play g4. And the idea is on g4, you're actually one move too slow because black's king will cut your king off. However, if you play g3, you're one square closer, and because of that fact, and black's king is one square further, you will get the opposition and you win. Hopefully you were able to see some of these positions. Some of them intrigued you, some of them tested you, and hopefully you can apply this to your own games. As you can clearly see, this can be the difference between winning, drawing, like clutching a losing position, or losing a winning position, right? And you need to be able to have this information so that you can get the most optimal outcomes in your games and get better at chess. Thanks for watching.